Charming, endearing, endangered. Threatened by man and brutalized by nature. A penguin colony struggles for its life. Two dedicated rangers enter their hidden sanctuary, determined to save them. But it may already be too late. Fairy penguins, the secret of Sydney Harbour. On Australia's southeastern coast, by one of the world's great natural harbours, lies Sydney, a city of light and colour, attracting fun-loving tourists from around the world, and major corporations from Southern Asia to the Pacific Rim. In the last generation, Sydney's population has boomed to over 4 million. Out of these millions, only a few know a closely guarded secret about some neighbours just across the way, the fairy penguins of Sydney Harbour. Fully grown, they stand less than a metre tall. These penguins, the smallest in the world, now face the biggest fight of their lives. Like all animals living in the wild, the penguins must overcome the natural hazards of their environment. Living so close to a major city, though, stacks the odds higher against them. Conservationists fear that these challenges may doom the fairy penguins here, erasing them forever from Sydney Harbour. But Park Ranger Julie Bourne and Greg Webb of the Taronga Zoo are fighting for the penguin's survival.
Basically, you can have a stick your head in the sand approach where it's a small endangered population, don't do anything to it, it'll be all right, it'll just survive if you just leave it alone. I don't agree with that policy. How do we know it's going to be all right? How do we know it's not on the decline now?
Last year's breeding season sounded an alarm. Only 5% of the colony's chicks survived long enough to fledge. This year, Greg and Julie will monitor the colony's adult population and how many chicks live long enough to fledge. Was last season a fluke of nature or an omen of impending disaster? From March until August, the penguins live in open ocean. Where? No one knows. Tonight, they return to the shore where they were hatched. Tonight, the fairy penguin's breeding season begins. Greg assumes an observer post on the beach where he's watched the penguins return to Sydney Harbour for many years. His night vision binoculars cut through the twilight. These male penguins land first to prepare nests for the females, who will arrive in a few weeks. The males form a raft, waiting for darkness to cover their arrival. Like other penguins, they feel more at home in the sea. But the fairy penguins take natural caution a step further, rarely coming ashore in daylight. Once on land, they make easy prey for the cats and dogs who live in the houses nearby. Greg knows what to expect. The penguins will wait for night. Then they'll hit the beach, scatter and rush for cover, making them impossible to count. So Greg counts them now. He notes that most of the colony's males have returned, a good start to the breeding season. Further south, near Melbourne, another returning fairy penguin colony arrives to a very different type of welcome. At the Phillip Island Nature Park, one of Australia's major tourist attractions, the crowds have gathered, to see the world-famous penguin parade. Every night during breeding season, the Phillip Island penguins parade from the water to their burrows. Waves of hundreds of penguins hit the beach within just a few hours. The delighted crowds don't faze the penguins a bit. After all, they're just walking. By contrast, the endangered colony at Sydney Harbour lives in seclusion. The National Parks and Wildlife Service keeps their colony's exact location a secret, and the penguins themselves play it cool. Most people in Sydney don't even know they exist.
The number of people I talk to and I say, oh, I'm studying penguins, and they go, oh, in Antarctica. And I say, no, in Sydney Harbour, and they usually are quite surprised. It's kind of good that not many people know about them because it, in some way, that protects the colony.
They're getting ready to come ashore. As the sun sets, Sydney's commuters head home, oblivious to one of the harbour's great annual rituals and to their neighbours, patiently waiting for night. Special infrared cameras reveal the colony's male penguins as they gather together and prepare to come ashore. The first raft of males moves cautiously out of the water. Meet Tom, 6 years old and a rugged individualist. While the other guys head for rocky sandstone caves lining the shore, Tom makes his way to the urban home he shares with his mate Bill. It's private, it's exclusive, it's at the top of 162 steps. Julie can't say exactly when Tom and Belle selected this remote hideaway.
Only anecdotally from what residents have said and from what neighbours have said, we think for around about 6 years, but we've only been measuring them for 3, so prior to that we really don't know, but we think about 6 years.
Tom scurries to make sure none of the other males has invaded the nest he has shared with Belle for so long. Just a hole in the wall with some twigs and grass, but they call it home. Uh-oh. Tom goes on full penguin alert. What's that noise? It could be a cat prowling round. To check it out. An intruder, a young male looking for his own secluded nesting spot. This won't be pretty. But a penguin has to do what a penguin has to do. Under the penguin's cool facade beats the heart of a world champion fighter, featherweight division. Few people have ever witnessed the fury of a fairy penguin nesting brawl. The intruder puts up a good fight, but Tom's defending his home turf. In the end, age and wisdom win out over youth, the youngster looking the worse for wear. The penguin's raucous noise will fill the night until all the males have selected and defended a home. Tom guards the entrance to his nest until he's sure the intruder has gone. Even though he failed here, the young penguin will eventually find a nest. Opportunists at heart, the penguins aren't shy about moving into property that belongs to others. The penguins make themselves at home in the tiny places their human neighbours don't use. Even discarded crates make excellent prefabricated homes, requiring only a penguin's finishing touch. Applied in between naps, of course. The natural geography of Sydney Harbour provides another source of penguin housing. Criss-crossed with caves and crevices, the sandstone cliffs are filled with penguin families during breeding season. The penguins have simple needs: a protected entry with a short tunnel leading to an area just big enough for a cosy nest. Warm, snug, easy to guard. Julie's research brings her to the penguins' secret homes. She's a newcomer to their world.
Never thought about penguins until I came to work in Sydney Harbour National Park.
Last year, unusually heavy rains deluged Sydney Harbour, driving out the penguins' main food source, a small fish called the pilchard. The adult penguins began to starve. Searching for food, they swam further and further from their nests, eventually abandoning their chicks, nearly all of whom soon perished. The National Parks and Wildlife Service mounted a penguin recovery plan, but quickly realised that no one really knew very much about the fairy penguins. That's where Julie came in.
We started doing a bit of monitoring and observations, and I was just too curious and basically approached Charles Sturt University and said I'd like to do a PhD in this.
To assist her with the research job tonight, Julie recruits volunteers from the neighbourhoods near the penguins' nesting area.
I meet a lot of people when I'm snooping around their backyards and they're usually very positive and will introduce themselves, and I normally introduce myself to people as well. They're more than keen to come along and help out with any further research that they can, so that's where most of the numbers come from.
Well, it's just to have such an endangered species of penguins living so close to a major metropolitan city is a wonderful thing. And despite all the kind of human activity around here, for them to make this their home as well means that it's a wonderful thing to have both living together. So keeping them here is one of the amazing things of living in Sydney, really. It's not many cities in the world have this kind of wildlife at their doorstep.
Of course, not everyone has turned out.
They're very noisy and very smelly, and a lot of people don't like them.
I think it's pretty good. There's still a few people yet to come, but we sort of need about 30, and I'd say we'll probably get a few more than that, so it's looking pretty good. We should have enough sausages. Well done, medium rare, rare, well done. Well done.
Eventually, 42 people show up to lend a hand.
All right, if I can have everybody's attention, please. First up, thank you all heaps for coming tonight. We can't do this sort of thing without the help of volunteers, basically because there's not enough of us to go around. So yeah, thank you, your help is greatly appreciated. The objective of tonight is, well, what's going to happen is I've got data sheets with folders, which everybody will get. So the idea is you sit on your observer point and everybody's got to look in the same direction, which is over your left shoulder. Basically, the idea is to count penguins that come ashore between an area which is between yourself and the next observer.
We'll share. The office tomorrow?
If you give them back to me at the end of... They're fairly protective. They've got a lot of ownership of their penguins, which is a really good thing because they're like our watchdogs. Anybody goes around there that they don't know, they start asking questions and they get on the phone to me, and it's really good because that does actually protect the colony a lot. They're also very mindful of things like cats and dogs, but on the whole they basically just look out for the penguins, and I think it's also in their own interests. They don't want the whole of Sydney basically lobbing up on their back doorstep to look at them, and they also don't want to see the penguins disappear. I think they really like having them so close.
Julie's volunteers feel privileged to live near the penguins, their secret and endangered neighbours. They'll gladly spend an evening sitting by the harbour, helping Julie count the female penguins as they arrive to join their mates. Belle returns to Tom, her mate for life, whom she hasn't seen since the end of the last breeding season 8 months ago. Tonight, Tom has company on the long climb to the nest. Reunited, Tom and Belle settle in. They preen their feathers, squeezing out the water, removing any feathers that are bent or broken, calling out their greetings as they get reacquainted. While Tom went to the beach to meet Belle, a small camera was carefully placed and hidden in the nest. Operated by remote control, the camera captured this rare footage of the mating of the fairy penguins. Depending on how much food they find, fairy penguins can breed twice each season. Each clutch usually consists of 2 eggs. To recover from last year's disaster, the colony needs to hatch and fledge as many chicks as possible. Tom and Belle have done their part. Down on the beach, the rest of the colony does theirs. The beach party wails on through the night, a hopeful sign of many chicks to come. When suddenly, the prospects for this season's chicks, and for the colony as a whole, take a turn for the worse. The tanker, Laura D'Amato, spills 290,000 litres of crude oil into Sydney Harbour. By the next morning, a 10-kilometre oil slick covers the water and the penguins' feeding ground. Hitting at this time of the year, the oil spill may prove one disaster too many for the colony to survive. On hearing the news, there's little Julie can do.
Panic. Initially, yeah, panic, because there was no information as to how big the slick was or where it was spreading to. And my main concern was that if it got around or further up the harbour, it may potentially affect the burrow sites, which would be catastrophic for the breeding season.
The oil spill affects all the wildlife on the harbour. Many animals and birds, including penguins, sicken and die. Greg evaluates the situation.
And most likely that the reason why they've been oiled up is they've been feeding around the harbour. They haven't picked up the oil around the immediate area of the colony. They've obviously been feeding way up around near where the oil spill occurred.
Animal rescue teams swing into action. As the cleanup revs into high gear. In recent years, Sydney's put enormous resources into cleaning up the harbour. Experienced, fully equipped crews put their expertise to work, battling the tons of oil polluting the water. A heavy rain breaks up the slick, and some of the oil evaporates. The colony escapes with minimal damage, and everyone heaves a sigh of relief.
Well, it looks to be a lot more positive than I thought. We don't have any oil actually around the colony, but that's probably just lucky because when the oil spill occurred, the tide was on the rise, so the oil went back up into the harbour.
As the oil spill clears, Sydney Harbour gets its biggest surprise in 20 years. Alex, a 16-metre, 60-ton southern right whale. Excited Sydney-siders flock to the harbour to catch a glimpse. It's unlikely they'll see a visitor like this again anytime soon. Six weeks go by. Life in Sydney Harbour returns to normal. For the penguins, that means swimming, preening, and generally goofing off. Greg and Julie tour the penguins' nests, documenting the colony and rescuing any birds still affected by the oil spill.
After all the hype of the oil spill, we needed to go out and survey the burrows and the landing sites for a few weeks, just to pick up any birds that may have been affected by the oil spill. Basically, we didn't find any birds that were affected at that stage. I think that was due to the fact that the oil didn't come towards the colony and it was fairly well contained.
As Greg and Julie make their rounds, they find eggs in many of the nests. This puts the colony ahead of how things stood this time last year and gives the rangers hope. Both rangers acknowledge that they have been completely charmed by the birds they study.
Yeah, I do find them cute. I don't know why, because they do bite and scratch and poop on me, but yeah, I think it's something about probably the way they walk, the little waddle, that's what gets me, yeah.
They're pretty cute and cuddly looking animals, dressed in their suit-like plumage.
Both rangers focus on their work, dedicating themselves to studying the fairy penguins. The National Parks and Wildlife Service Penguin Recovery Plan outlines their duties, monitoring the colony's size, health and composition, keeping records of how many eggs the penguins lay and how many chicks hatch. Australia's Bird and Bat Banding Authority provides the metal bands the rangers use to tag the birds. The rangers record information about the birds they've banned and send the information to the authority. The authorities' immense database contains records on thousands of animals and aids conservation efforts by tracking their migration and their behaviour. Today, Julie shows Dion Coburn, a ranger from a nearby park, how to check and tag the newly hatched chicks.
All right, so this is pretty typical of, I guess, where the penguins nest. It's all really rocky and they just go up. You can see up underneath there. And the burrows are basically anything that is a crevice above the high tide mark. So they're not terribly picky as long as it's fairly deep, so it protects them from predators, and as long as it's got fairly good cover, hide them away. There's a couple of chicks up here, big fat chicks, which I'm going to put a band on today. There they are. Hello guys. All right, untangle myself from the lantana. I'll get you to hold the bags if you don't mind. And I'll just whack my gloves on because I'm a big wuss. Even though they are just little chicks, they still bite pretty hard.
So you're just going to place it in and you want me to hold the top close?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great. Yeah.
Just I bet they're soft.
Mm.
Yes, come on.
Hello, buddy. Oh. All right. Here. Now, if you want to just hang him off that branch on the tree, because we find that if we put them on the rocks, the little bags go running away off the rock platform. So hanging them on the tree is probably the safest thing we can do for them.
Julie checks the chick's weight and condition, looking for any signs of malnutrition, which doesn't seem to be a problem for this fellow.
They're pretty fat. See how much they weigh. 1,250. That's a good weight. They normally actually put on more weight than the adults do just before they fledge. That way they're in really good condition to go out. And the band's specially shaped. It's got little contoured bits so that it doesn't rub.
Okay.
And it has to be fairly hydrodynamic because the flipper is the main source of propulsion for the bird. Unlike most other birds which propel themselves through the water with their feet, penguins use their flippers.
So you just squeeze it so it's joined up?
Squeeze it so it's joined up and there's no sharp bits. Get your head back in there. Come on, it's better if you don't look. You can see he's losing his chick feathers. And he's getting his gorgeous blue adult feathers. Just get some head measurements and we'll put him back. Where's your head? Alright. Alright. Normally cover their eyes because when they can't see anything they calm down a lot more.
Yep.
Okay, Coolman length is 31.7.
Measuring the bird's head and beak tells Julie the bird's age. From this, she can see whether the chick's growing at a normal rate and whether the colony has enough food to keep its chicks healthy. By late October, the party's over for the colony's adult penguins. Tending eggs and coping with newborn chicks occupies every minute.
Yes.
Males and females split the domestic chores from the time the eggs appear until the chicks have fledged. Belle leaves the nest before dawn to hunt for food. Inside, Tom babysits their eggs. Sitting on the eggs requires special skills like egg turning. The eggs need equal warmth, both sunny side up and easy over. And not just any old sitting position will do. A gap in the penguin's feathers, called a brood patch, puts the bird's body heat closer to the eggs, making for more efficient incubation. While Tom tends the eggs, Belle hunts for food. The harbour's fish and squid head the menu. Normally, the penguins don't need to hunt any further than their own backyard. Fairy penguins can hold their breath for up to a minute. They rarely dive deeper than 30 meters, preferring to hunt near the surface. As the sun goes down, Belle comes ashore and makes her way up to the burrow. In noisy penguin style, she and Tom share the events of the day. Soon, under the cover of night, Tom will leave the nest and spend the night on the hunt. Identifying new chicks and keeping tabs on the welfare of the colony keeps Greg as busy as a penguin.
Check the burrows for occupancy, see what adult is in the burrow and how many eggs and chicks, if that, whether the burrow is active or not. We've got quite a lot of burrows to check throughout the day, so that's a pretty demanding workload. Like there's about 120 burrows to get through in one day. And depending on the season, whether there's chicks or not, there's a lot of banding of the chicks, which takes a lot of time. Banding and measuring beaks and weighing them, just getting that sort of information. And any adults that may need banding as well that we haven't come across before.
By Greg's count, the colony has produced more eggs and chicks this year than last, a good sign, but not a guarantee of success. For the fourth year running, Belle is a mother, an exhausted, sleep-deprived mother. For the last 35 days, they were just eggs, and as a rule, eggs don't make many demands. Now, Belle and Tom must satisfy the endless needs of two helpless chicks, too weak to even hold up their heads. Luckily, they're cute. The chicks need round-the-clock attention, so Tom and Belle take turns leaving the nest for food, and not just for themselves. Their chicks can't go to the food, so Tom and Belle must bring the food to their chicks. Tom returns from feeding, greets Belle, and regurgitates his meal for the chicks. Not a gracious living, but it works, and it's easier for the chicks to digest. After dinner, the chicks settle down for the day. Belle leaves the nest. Tom takes his turn keeping the chicks warm until Belle returns that night. On day 5, the chicks appear noticeably bigger. They're fluffied down thicker, and they grow increasingly restless, eager to get out of the nest. Fairy penguins mature at an alarming rate, transforming into adults in just over 5 weeks. At the age of 1 month, adult feathers are replacing their fuzzy down. And their adult shape emerges from their plump chick bodies. Tom and Belle, like other penguin parents, struggle to feed their chicks enough to keep up with their growth. The chicks no longer need to be watched every minute. Good thing, because it takes both parents to keep them in pilchard and squid. Each chick eats an astonishing amount of food, over 500 grams a day. Hundreds of frenzied penguin parents scour the harbour for food, and they mustn't let down their guard. Other hunters patrol the harbour. Whistling kites and other birds of prey also call Sydney Harbour their home. Lightning fast, they can snatch penguins right out of the water. Fortunately, the penguins' dark plumage makes them hard to spot from above. And from below, their white belly feathers let them disappear into the sunlight, where unwary fish can't see them. For the most part, the penguins' camouflage and caution keeps them safe. Before too long, the chicks will learn these lessons too. At 9 weeks, the chicks teeter on the brink of adulthood. They venture further from the nest. The waterproof feathers they need to stay afloat have replaced their down. The chicks are ready to fledge. Their parents feed them for the last time. Now, during their first days of independence, the most dangerous few days of their young lives, the chicks must learn to be penguins. Survival is their first lesson. Most of the kite's success comes in the open water. While learning to cope with life at sea, the young penguins make easy prey. After attacking, the kite leaves little behind. Only the spine and the legs with feet intact. Here, high above the burrows, lie the remains of 5 penguins, trophies of the kite's ferocity. Attack survivors serve as a warning to others. Kite or no, after hours of hunger, with their parents refusing to feed them, the fledglings make their way to the water for their first swim. And like that, they're gone. Tom and Belle won't see the chicks again for at least 2 years, when they'll return to breed, if they survive. Before returning to the sea, Tom and Belle, like all the colony's adults, face one more challenge, one that may cost them their lives. Once a year, the penguins molt their waterproof feathers. During this process, they can't go into the water to feed. For just over 2 weeks, the penguins will starve, stuck on land, in broad daylight, vulnerable to any predator who can outrun them. All they can do is to eat as much as they can hold before the molt begins. and find a safe place to hide until the molt is over. The penguins select this hillside for their molt, remote but an easy climb. After several days of almost constant feeding, Belle waddles ashore, well prepared for the coming fast. Her dull feathers show the signs of the impending molt. Carrying around 2 kilograms takes some getting used to. Although awkward, the extra weight should help Belle survive the fast. Normally, a strict social order governs the lives of fairy penguins, but with a molt, social order goes out of the window. Some penguins prefer large groups, while others, like Belle, opt for solitude. The remaining penguins gather uneasily. Now all they can do is wait. Belle climbs to a shady place among the rocks. For the next 2 weeks, she'll stay cool and hidden. While molting, the penguins barely move around, partly from hunger and partly because much of their blood has been drawn down to the skin. The increased circulation nourishes the new feathers. Ashore for 48 hours, Belle shows no sign of shedding. After 3 days, she has already lost 150 grams. After 11 days, the old feathers that have been pushed out by the new lie in piles at the base of the nest. The penguins on the beach cope as best they can. As their hunger increases, they weaken. Tom displays his new feathers. Soon he'll head back to sea, but only after completing the molt. Without adequate waterproofing, he would almost certainly drown. After 15 grueling days, the molt draws to an end for Belle. The fast is nearly over. Belle joins a group of penguins heading out to the open ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, the buffet is now open. Free, gloriously free, for the next 6 months, until the urge to breed draws them back to Sydney Harbour once again. Greg and Julie spend their time collating the data they gathered during the breeding season. Their combined research constitutes most of what's known about Sydney's fairy penguins, including the migratory routes they travel after leaving the harbour.
And some of them are quite incredible distances. We've had a bird that's banded around this colony here and turned up thousands of kilometres away in South Australia, which is an incredible round trip.
A handful of penguins reside in the colony over the winter. 2 weeks after the molt, they raft in from the harbour, probably drawn back by a plentiful supply of food. With no eggs to tend, no chicks to feed, the penguins can look forward to a leisurely winter with lots of time for self-improvement. Belle will spend the season in Sydney Harbour. When Tom rafts in next spring, she'll be there to greet him, climb the steps, and wait until he prepares the nest. Greg and Julie can look back at a season of successful research and forward to the return of the penguins they study and care for. By spring, Greg's completed his computer analysis of the colony's prospects for survival.
I'm feeling a lot more optimistic than I was this time last year, basically because the penguins have come back to molt and they've molted successfully. And this breeding season, basically the penguins have come back to breed. They've laid eggs, they've raised chicks and they've fledged chicks successfully.
There's been very few abandoned eggs or chicks and just abandoned nests in general, and very few underweight fledglings, which kind of indicates to me that it is definitely more successful than last season.
The fairy penguins overcame a disastrous breeding season and weathered an oil spill. They fledged their chicks and survived the molt, and demonstrated that given half a chance, they will flourish in secret in Sydney Harbour.